Hello, everybody, and welcome to Psychology in Everyday Life, the Psych Files. Michael Britt here, and this is episode 27, entitled From Insane Asylum to Psychiatric Center, a brief history of how we have treated people with mental disorders in this country. I recently interviewed Dr. Roger Christenfeld, and he oversees the museum at one of the oldest psychiatric centers in the country, and that would be the Hudson River Psychiatric Center. I think you'll find some interesting stuff in here. So a little foray into the history of mental illness in this country. Okay, let's go. All right, so we're here with Roger Christenfeld, the research director at the Hudson River Psychiatric Center. And Roger, before we go take a look at the museum, let me just ask you a question. When I was here in the mid-'70s, it had just changed over from the Hudson Valley, what was it called at that time? Hudson River Hudson River State Hospital.
Yep.
And I understand from just doing a little bit of research that it used to be called an asylum?
When it started in 1869, it was the Hudson River Asylum for the Insane. And back then, of course, asylum was a pretty good word, place you go for refuge and respite. But once it got to be attached to insane, the stigma began to grow around it. After about 50 years or so, it got changed into Hudson River State Hospital. Hospital is a pretty good word where you go get cured. But state hospital, unfortunately, back came the stigma like barnacles on the hull of a ship. About 25 years ago, it became Hudson River Psychiatric Center. It was pretty good until Psychiatric Center began to devolve. I assume that probably within our lifetime, psychiatric centers will be dissolved and something new will grow in their place, which will be quite similar, but will be called something like the Hudson River Behavioral Healthcare Management Organization.
I understand this used to be owned by Roosevelt, some of this property here?
This was all part of James Roosevelt's farm, Mount Hope, and he sold it to the county, Dutchess County, and they used it as a lure to attract one of the then extraordinarily desirable state hospitals, which were just getting built in the big wave of reform in the Victorian times, Dorothea Dix and such.
We generally attribute Freud as a person who was one of the first, maybe he was one of the first, just the loudest, who took us away from thinking of mental illness as some kind of being possessed or whatever, into some kind of actual illness.
Yeah, that actually happened socially 50 years before Freud. That up until then, in this huge sweep of reform, which happened, it started in England as part of the general care for the disadvantaged in late Victorian times. For the poor, they were being discovered by Dickens, and the general unfairness that industrialization had brought to social life and the movement of masses of people into cities which were regarded as black holes of iniquity. In this country, Dorothea Dix, especially around this part of the United States, was going around to state legislatures and saying all of our mentally ill are now in prisons and poorhouses, and they are being treated undifferentiatedly with criminals and paupers, and they should be separated out. They should be treated rather than punished. They are not bad, they are mad, they deserve better than this. And there was this great wave, the beginning of the building of state hospitals. States only at that time began to take responsibility for the care of the mentally ill. Before then, it was left to towns and villages. And what would happen is, in the dead of night, town elders would gather up some of the vagrants and troublemakers and people who mutter and shuffle in the streets, and they would take them in a cart to a nearby town and leave them in the village green.
Just drop them off.
Very much the same sort of thing that we see now as people get shifted from one budget to another.
Now that's in this country.
That's here, yeah. Primarily New England, yeah, famous for that sort of thing.
So Dorothea Dix was the first person to become vocal about.
Yes, was a kind of a lightning rod for this sort of reformism.
So then were any buildings on this property when they decided to put a...
Essentially not in a few farm buildings, the odd barn or stable. Back then, lots of towns were in fierce contention to have state hospitals built in their area. They competed for these things the way some towns still compete for large prisons, and for the same reason. It's jobs for the boys and the gals. And for many years, Hudson River State Hospital was far and away the biggest employer, the leading industry in this area. Dutchess County also had one of the highest rates in the country for admission to mental hospital. And this is not because it is a particularly sick area, but because everybody knew that route. Everybody had a cousin or a neighbor who worked here, and if you were troubled, this is where you came. And the rules for entry into a mental hospital back then were just about the opposite of what they are today. It was a very easy place to get into, very hard place to get out of.
Really?
Now you practically need 3 people to sign their names in blood for you to get into a place like this. You need, in fact, a couple of psychiatrists to say that you are an imminent danger to yourself or others by reason of a mental disorder. And as soon as you get in here, they start planning for your release.